Long gone are the days of Peyton Manning leading the Indianapolis Colts deep in the playoffs, AFC championships, battling Tom Brady and the Patriots on who's going to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. Brian, talk to me about the Colts and what they look like in 2024.
Yeah, they were middle of the road, 8 and 9. I mean, it second in their division, just it wasn't great football, wasn't bad football. It was just kind of middle of the road, right where we kind of both had them pegged last year, and I don't know how well they're going to do this year, but we're going to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their offense, they were 13th last year, 335 yards a game. I think Joe Flacco and the ability to distribute the football and be consistent was what really helped them last year. But their defense really held them back. 29th, giving up 360 plus yards per game. That really lends them to that 8-9 record because, as good as some of their pieces were on offense, they simply could not score as much as what their defense was giving up. And I'm not really sure that that's going to change going into this year. Looking at some of their key departures, I mean, Joe Flacco is now a Cleveland Brown in the midst of a four quarterback battle for who's going to be the starter of that terrible team. And you leave behind a bad quarterback battle in Indianapolis that we're going to talk about. They also lost a center, Ryan Kelly, and a starting guard in Will Fries. They are now both Minnesota Vikings. They're going to be protecting J.J. McCarthy instead of whoever wins the battle here. And then they also lost their kicker, Matt Gay. He is now a Washington Commander. So we expect him to have a much better year, a lot more opportunities to put that ball between the uprights than what he would have in Indianapolis. But Brian, just as far as what they lost going from last year to this year, I feel like it's just not very promising for improvement in 2025. What do you think?
Yeah, losing Joe Flacco, I don't think they lost. They lost some a veteran presence in the locker room and the quarterback room for sure. But I don't know talent on the field. He's an older quarterback, similar to Aaron Rodgers. I don't know how much he's got left in the tank. So I honestly don't know that that hurt them greatly. Losing their linemen probably did hurt them. As you can tell, if you're following this series, I'm very high on the offensive line, and what that brings to football, whether you have a good team or a bad team. So losing those two key linemen, I think that's going to hurt. Losing their kicker, I think he's a good kicker. I had him on my fantasy team in one of my leagues last year. Good kicker. I'm like you. I think he's going to do great at Washington because he's going to have more opportunities. I don't know that he's going to have a lot of opportunities to score field goals, but extra points, he should be pretty great at that by the end of the 2025 year. So, yeah, departure wise, I don't know. Some of it hurts, some of it doesn't. I it kind of goes along with the rest of my feelings with this team.
I mean, the Colts, they invested a very high pick in Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida to try to develop him into being a quality starter. And so far, he's just not that. We've seen him have flashes of brilliance, specifically in the fantasy football stage. I'm not sure that he'll ever be a really good, true NFL caliber player. For fantasy football, he can be really good, but he's terribly inconsistent. I think what Joe Flacco provided was that consistency. It provided a light at the end of the tunnel because if you had Anthony Richardson on your fantasy teams and he was putting up 30-point games, that was great. But he was doing so much of it with his legs that it didn't really benefit you to have any of his weapons. I mean, Jonathan Taylor was having to succeed on his own. Certainly, none of the receivers were going to benefit from Anthony Richardson being on the field because I think he struggles to be a 50% passer over the course of his career this far. And so it was almost a breath of fresh air for this entire offense. And certainly the fantasy owners, anybody that had pieces of that offense when Joe Flacco was coming in. So Joe Flacco exiting and now enter in Daniel Jones on a 1-year, $14 million deal. We are seeing both of those. We're recording this as the start of training camp has opened up. They are splitting team reps right down the middle as far as the first team goes. Daniel Jones will get 2 practices and he'll have 16 team reps. And then Anthony Richardson will get 2 practices. He'll have 16. And of course, his 2 seconds. They are splitting this right down the middle. And it's very much may the best man win. The coaches have said the winner of this is not going to be the most flashy. It's going to be the most consistent. from that, I think it favors Daniel Jones. I think if you are a Michael Pittman Jr. owner in fantasy football, your dynasty leagues, you're probably hoping that Daniel Jones wins that job. But how good is he? I mean, we saw how he was with the Giants. We saw him try to go and latch on last year with the Vikings, and they obviously let him walk after a single year in favor. They didn't even want him backing up J.J. McCarthy. So what does that tell you when now he's on another team in a competition against another unproven, quarterback, another bad passer, and they're not even giving him the job outright. They did not sign him to be the starter. They signed him to let him compete in camp, maybe even in hopes that it would push Anthony Richardson. I do like a couple of their other signings a good bit more, though. Charvarius Ward comes over and Cameron Bynum. So these are two additions to the safety. 3 years, $60 million for Ward, and 4 years, $60 million for Bynum, revamping a secondary that was so badly torched all season last year. I talked about them being 29th on defense. They were terrible against the pass, bringing in a couple of marquee defenders into that secondary, going into the draft and being able to address other needs, I felt like was very good for Indianapolis. So what do you think about them going into the draft?
I think they were a mediocre team last year. I think they're going to be less than mediocre this year, and it just is what it is. Uh, I don't know. This is one of these teams I'm not going to be overly hyped on. I'm not, and it may even sound like I'm a little bit down on them. It's just I've never been a Colts fan. Even when they had the great Peyton Manning there, I've never been. I've never gotten into the Colts brand of football. Now, to say I'm not dissing any of their fan base, you know, I'm sure they have the best fan base if you actually went to a game in person, but I personally am just not very high on them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I feel like this can't really be stated enough. It's so important that when you draft a quarterback highly, it's a swing at glory. And when you swing and miss, you are setting your franchise back so far. One of the best examples of this being avoided recently is the San Francisco 49ers. They traded up massively to get up to the top three of their draft to take Trey Lance, who had only started like 14 games at North Dakota State. Everybody thought he was the next best thing. He was going to be the quarterback that led them deep into the playoffs, and then he wasn't. Injuries, poor play. I mean, he really set their franchise back, if not for the unlikely savior that was Brock Purdy, who finally got his payment to go from Mr. Irrelevant to extremely relevant. And he really built out that franchise. It took an outlier of all outliers from the Mr. Irrelevant pick of that draft to save that franchise, because what they gave up and what they invested into Trey Lance could have crippled the 49ers as we know it. You are now seeing that from the Indianapolis Colts. What they invested in Anthony Richardson versus what they've gotten from him has really set this team back. And I just don't think that they had the assets to be able to transform this team to build around him and make it a great winning football team. And I think the quarterback position is so important in today's NFL that I think that you can't be competitive on the grand stage, maybe competitive in smaller stints. If your quarterback goes down and you've got a backup that can come in and play inspired football, sure. But I don't see them finishing second in this division. I don't see them finishing on the brink of a wild card berth. I think this team going into the draft, they unfortunately just had too many holes to fill to really make the talent that they added be in a position to succeed in 2025. But we'll go right into that draft. I mean, starting with pick 14 in the first round, Tyler Warren. A lot of people had him on their boards as the number one tight end prospect coming out of Penn State. People think this could be the next George Kittle. And surprisingly, he was not the first tight end taken because the Bears took Colston Loveland 4 picks ahead of them at pick 10. But Tyler Warren, not to take anything away from him, he is a great all-around tight end. He got used all over the field at Penn State. He was taking snaps at running back, at fullback. He was even taking snaps straight from the center. He did play quarterback in high school and converted to tight end. He's somebody that can play inline and block. You can line him up as a receiver, screens. I mean, they used him all over the field. It is very apparent that he was the best player on that team. They got the ball in his hands. I know some people didn't like him because he had a late breakout age. But look at the tight ends that were playing ahead of him with like Fryermuth and Theo Johnson. He had to wait his turn, but when he got it, he exploded. And I think that he is going to be very good for this team once they find their quarterback. I'm not sure that they have it on roster right now. I don't think Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson is going to be the guy that makes Tyler Warren look as great as what he was drafted to be. But if they suck as bad as we think they could this year, and that leads to getting a Garrett Nussmeier or a promising young quarterback in next year's draft, we could see Tyler Warren taking a true big time step forward in 2026. But we're talking about 2025 now. So moving forward in the draft, second round pick, JT Tuomalau. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad. There's a reason that Ohio State fans called him JTT as a defensive end. It's a lot easier to say. He comes in on that poor defense, gets to add some depth as a rotational piece, an eventual plus starter on that defensive line, I think. And then a couple of jumping ahead, round 5 and round 6, you get a couple of intriguing backup options on some key positions on the offense. So DJ Giddens is a running back from Kansas State that I was very high on as a prospect. I think that were something happened to Jonathan Taylor, I don't think it's Khalil Herbert that comes in to be his replacement. I think it's DJ Giddens. I think he has some explosiveness. I think he's got great pass catching ability. I think that if he can be a decent pass protector and earn the trust of his quarterback and his coaching staff, he's somebody that can ascend to that RB2 position on this roster immediately, very early on in the season. And like I said, if something were to happen to Jonathan Taylor, and I certainly hope that that doesn't ever happen, but I think that Giddens is a name to watch in this backfield. He would be the automatic number one waiver wire pickup in fantasy and somebody that I think could actually win weeks in fantasy because he is that good. And then Riley Leonard, we saw him make a deep playoff run with Notre Dame, go all the way to the national championship and eventually losing to Ohio State. Riley Leonard is somebody that can run the football. He's somebody that has been mistake prone at times, but I mean, we've seen players turn that around. If you look at what Josh Allen was at Wyoming versus what he is today with the Bills, he has had such a high trajectory arc, just a massive turnaround. And I think Riley Leonard is going to need like a Shane Steichen level coach that can take a hold of him, get him under his wing, and help him develop as a quarterback. I'm not saying he's going to be the quarterback of the future, but I'm also not saying that he's not a better option than Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones either, because he could step in and be exactly what this offense needs as early as later on this year.
Yeah, I agree. I like the last two picks, honestly. I'm not mad at the Warren pick at 14. When you're middle of the road, you get more middle of the road picks. Being an Atlanta fan, we know all about that.
Sure.
So I like the Warren. I think they're going to utilize him. He doesn't have to get accustomed to the uniform. Obviously, the white is just where it's at, I guess. But the Leonard pickup, I'm really excited about, and unfortunately, I wish he did have a better quarterback, a veteran quarterback that could teach him the rope, so to speak, because I do think he's a gritty kid. He's super gritty at Notre Dame, so he's not afraid to put his head down and run that football. So, I like I said, I wish he had a little bit better in front of him. And you know, honestly, I almost wish they'd have worked out a deal with Atlanta, and picked up Atlanta's backup quarterback, Kirk Cousins, but that just wasn't in the cards. So I don't know if it was just too much money or what the backbone of that would be, but I think he could have learned from that veteran Kirk Cousins more so than what he's got in front of him right now, uh, which is an I don't know. Uh, so, uh, yeah, I think they did a good job with the draft picks that they had. I wouldn't necessarily give them an A. I wouldn't necessarily give them a B, but somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's one of those you look at what we talked about in the Baltimore Ravens video. I was not very big on Cooper Rush backing up Lamar Jackson this year because I don't feel like he fits the offense. But you look at what Shane Steichen did when he was the offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles and what the strength of Jalen Hurts' game was. A lot of people looked at what he was going to bring to the Indianapolis Colts. Well, you look at this trio of quarterbacks between Richardson, Jones, and now Riley Leonard. All three of those quarterbacks are mobile. They know how to win with their legs. They know how to extend plays. They know how to make people miss. They can get yards on the ground. Riley Leonard would take over entire drives with his legs. You would look at him and he was about to blow chunks by the end of a drive because he's literally got his hands on his legs, just trying to catch his breath, trying to score a touchdown because he literally ran the ball himself all down the field, whether it was design QB runs, busted plays. I mean, it's just what he can provide in that offense. We talked about it in the Browns video as well with Dylan Gabriel. Maybe we don't ever see Dylan Gabriel being a long-term starter for this team, but they might have drafted their steady backup quarterback for the next 8 to 10 years. Riley Leonard could be that for the Indianapolis Colts. I do think that they need to invest in a top tier quarterback in next year's draft to really pilot this team. But Riley Leonard could be a mainstay on this roster for a long time if he can latch onto the scheme, be a steady presence, and eventually be somebody that can step in on Sundays in the case of an injury, win a game or two if necessary. I'm not sure that he's ever going to be the long-term starter, but I like what a 6th-round pick can provide for this team if he does improve the way that we think he can and maximize what his physical tools lend him to be as a player.
Well, I think that's why I went the Kirk Cousins way. Kirk Cousins isn't known for his mobility, but what he is known for is his arm, his accuracy. So could he teach a Riley Leonard to use his arm, and then you do have that highly mobile quarterback, and now you've taught him how to throw, which I don't think he's going to get from the other two in front of him. So that's why I said, bring in that throwing quarterback and let Leonard pick up. And even if he's your second round and going to be your second string quarterback for whatever time, you know, it's not going to hurt him to learn how to throw in the NFL. I assure you.
Yeah, I mean, this would have been a great pick for the Steelers to let Riley Leonard learn from Aaron Rodgers. So in his younger time, was somebody that
Good
extended
point.
plays, won with his feet, but knew how to pass at an elite level. That's somebody that Riley Leonard is not going to have being in Indianapolis. But we'll just have to see what kind of arc his career takes. This might be somebody that's out of the league in 2 years, and we see him playing in the UFL. Maybe he leads my Birmingham Stallions to a championship over there, and I'll like him just the same for that. But that being said, going into strengths and concerns for Indianapolis Colts, there's not a lot of strengths to talk about, but they've got a big one, and his name is Jonathan Taylor. He
Yep.
is still very much in his prime. He is somebody that can handle a massive workload, 30 plus carries a game. If you look at what he did last year, especially towards the end of the year, crippled by injuries and everything like that, he was still the focal point of this team. Defenses knew they could sell out to stop him, or at least try to, and they were still failing at it. It just goes to show the talent, the skill set, the ability that he has, that he can be just as good as any other running back in this league. He is just as good, in my opinion, as Bijan Robinson, as Jameer Gibbs, as Saquon Barkley. Yet he didn't have the rest of the Philadelphia Eagles offense. He didn't have the offensive line. He didn't have Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown and all those guys taking the pressure off of him. But he is still capable of having a 2,000-yard season if the offense around him was just as good. I think if you put Saquon and Jonathan Taylor and you swap their places, I think you get the same numbers that you got last year. It's just Jonathan Taylor getting all the credit for it instead of Saquon Barkley because Taylor is that good. He belongs to be mentioned in the same breath. That being said, the biggest concern comes back to that quarterback situation. It
Yep.
is dire straits. I am not a big fan of either of these options. No offense to Riley Leonard. He just got there, but he is not ready to be a pro quarterback. He is not ready to lead an offense. And guess what? 2 years in, neither is Anthony Richardson. And 4 or 5 years in, neither is Daniel Jones. They desperately need to invest next year in a new quarterback because this trio that they have on roster now, I don't think is it. And that I think is going to lead them to a very poor season, a losing record. I've got them at 5-12 in the division, finishing just ahead the Tennessee Titans, who we just talked about in yesterday's video or a couple of days ago about how bad we think they could be this year, even though they have their quarterback in the future. Indianapolis Colts going to be just as bad, but they don't have that chip in their pocket. They don't know who their quarterback is moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm just the opposite. I think they flip all the way to fourth. I think they flip with the Tennessee Titans. You know, if they win 3 games this year, I will be, you know, that's kind of where I'm going to be. if they win 5 games, they're going to do it on the back of Jonathan Taylor. You know, and I just don't think he has the surrounding cast. You know, Warren is going to help in that tight end position, but I don't think I'm like you. I don't think he's the savior. They desperately need a quarterback, and I don't even know that they can wait until the 2026 draft. I think they're going to need it this year.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they were always brought up in mentions of needing a quarterback because of how poor their quarterback room is going to play this year. I think they're going to get to a point though where they're going to realize that it does not behoove them to compete this year and spend valuable resources on a band-aid that what I perceive to be a bullet hole type wound. And I think they're just going to have to suck this year. I think the losses they had on the offensive line that weren't really addressed. I think trying to build this defense, having some of the young pieces in the receiving room is going to be great. But if you don't have a quarterback to pilot this offense, it does not matter how good you think Tyler Warren and Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. are. They do not have a quarterback that's going to be able to sustain drives. And if you start seeing this quarterback battle go from training camp to the regular season, that adage of if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any kind of thing is going to come true. I think it's going to play out on Sundays. And I think they're going to have a true locked in starter next year. And they better be following up with some offensive line picks as well, because they're going to have to build this offense up if Steichen hopes to keep his job. But that being said, I just don't think the Colts are going to be a very good team this year. But I don't think the Titans are either. And maybe that's where they get a couple of wins at. Jonathan Taylor is good enough to win a couple of games on his own. So going into the fantasy football section of this video, I'll make this real short and sweet. It's Jonathan Taylor and nobody else, because until this quarterback situation gets picked out, I don't want Tyler Warren. I don't want Pittman. I don't want Downs. I don't want anybody on this offense if it's not Jonathan Taylor.
Yep, I'm 100%. So, yeah, we're going to keep it short on the fantasy football side of things. With that being said, we don't want to bring down any of the Colts fans and think we're just beating up on them and hating on them, but it's just unfortunate. You're probably not going to have a very good year this year, but almost that you need it so that you can pick that quarterback up next year if you don't need it before then. So with all that being said, we'd like to thank everybody for watching. We hope you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe and like button for us, and we'll see you in the next video.